busy hour ahead. With us, we have Pulitzer Prize-winning host of Pablo Torre Finds Out, MS Now contributor Pablo Torre, opinion writer at the New York Times, Mara Gay, co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader. She's also a contributor to the Notice Perspectives column, and the former host of Hardball, Chris Matthews, with us as well. My thanks to all of you. We've got a lot to get to, so let's dive right in. Beginning with Senate Republicans rejecting the DOJ's $1.8 billion so-called Anti-Weaponization Fund. GOP lawmakers met with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche yesterday for a contentious 2-hour meeting to discuss that money. Sources describe the talk to Semaphore as a, quote, S show. You can fill in the blank yourself. Following the meeting, several Senate Republicans spoke publicly against the fund. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska said the White House dropped a bomb with the plan. Former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called it utterly stupid and morally wrong. And Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin called the fund a galactic blunder. And as we noted earlier, you got to do a lot to get on the wrong side of Ron Johnson. The discontent with the fund was so strong among Republicans that subs signaled they might even be willing to cross the aisle to support Democratic amendments aimed at blocking it. That possibility delayed the day's entire schedule, forcing Republican leadership to scrap all planned votes on their reconciliation package and send lawmakers home early ahead of Memorial Day weekend. The Senate will now have a week-long recess before coming back to Washington. So, Chris Matthews, let's start with you on this. We talked earlier in the show. I mean, look, no one's going to predict here that Donald Trump suddenly has lost his power over Republicans. We just saw what happened in primaries in Louisiana, Kentucky, Indiana, just to name a few over the last 2 weeks. But it is interesting here, some growing frustration on the Hill, particularly on the Senate side, saying we can't justify this. And there seems to be a real disconnect, maybe the biggest we've seen yet, between the president's priorities and those of his party.
Yeah, well, you know, the people breaking into the Capitol that January were going after senators and congressmen. They're going after these very people that were voting and, well, thinking about voting in that Senate meeting the other day. Those people were vulnerable. They were to be the victims of those people, crazy people, I would argue, mostly going after them, going after Pelosi, the whole gang of them. Mitt Romney had to run for his life. Of course they're going to be concerned. These talk about giving them free legal protection, covering them up as if they're good guys. These are the bad guys, and they're the bad guys to them. And by the way, if you're a Capitol cop like Harry Dunn, who's running for a House seat, for Steny Hoyer's seat, you care about this. In fact, he's out there protesting this. How can you give money, legal protection, to the people that are out to get you? And I think the senators finally stood up. I like Murkowski, I like Tillis, I certainly like Cassidy, all those people. And I really do think Thune must be thinking today and over the next week, whose side is he on?
Yeah, so Mara, I mean, let's, you know, we are glad we played that footage just there. There's been such an effort to whitewash what happened on January 6th, to downplay what we all witnessed with our own eyes, the violence, the horror, you know, that occurred, to try to interrupt the democratic process that our nation is founded upon. And the idea that it's not just that this money is for those who were perhaps wrongly accused or got ensnared. Many of these people were convicted by a jury of their peers. Yeah. They're convicted felons, and yet now they expect to potentially get millions of dollars.
Well, first of all, it's not only insulting to the Capitol cops who defended the democracy with their lives that day, it's also insulting to every single American voter who cast a ballot in that election and who was part of this democracy. It's also just completely out of touch, and I think the senators increasingly are realizing that Donald Trump does not care about their reelection concerns, but this is coming on the heels of the president asking for another, I believe, $1 billion for his ballroom. And that is not something that the American people voted for, no matter who they are. People are paying not just much higher gas prices at the pump, they're worried about paying their rent, paying their mortgages. They're worried about a lot of things that have gone wrong in Donald Trump's America. And they know that this president is deeply out of touch. deeply out of touch, and this is just another example of that. I think it's also just a slap in the face to Americans who have been told by this president, sorry, there is no money for Medicaid expansion, no money for healthcare, no money for public schools, for Medicare, and for childcare. We can't afford that because we're fighting foreign wars that I began that you didn't ask for. There's no money for reparations. This is a slap in the face for sure. I think a lot of Black Americans are extremely upset about this as well. But there's money for this, for these people who are essentially Donald Trump's cronies. And I also have to say, there's a second concern, and I just hope that they never get the money, but these are people who are dangerous.
Yes.
And so I actually am deeply concerned that these people would now be empowered to commit more violence.
Right, it's almost a permission, like, hey, do something down the road, we'll take care of you financially. But Pablo, let's be realistic about this. Had President Trump came up with this, they come up with this slush fund idea a year ago, when he was successfully putting together his legislative agenda, when the polls for him were reasonably good, and Republicans were on track to passing their big, beautiful bill legislation, I don't know that the GOP would have stood in the way. I think we have to acknowledge through the political lens here, Trump is polling in the 30s. This number here, 71% of Americans disapprove of his handling of the economy. That's why Republicans are suddenly growing a spine.
The whole freak show element of this does have Spirit Halloween after October 31st vibes. Suddenly, we're just trying all the weird stuff in the back. We're getting rid of all this stuff. Everything must go. And what I think about when it comes to what is the story here, it's not simply, and this is the most underrated story maybe in American political history at this point, January 6th was not about targeting politicians alone, right? So the whole notion of have empathy for the story of January 6th, because look at all those poor politicians, it is about everyone else who is not trafficking in insane extremism. And that, Lauren, that's the thing that I'm if there's a political opportunity here, do not make it about, to me, the poor senators, although, of course, it was actually horrifying and violent and really, really crazy.
Scary.
It's about what it says about the type of country that we want to live in, a country that is supposed to not be a third world S-hole, but something better. And that day was such the embodiment of the opposite.
Yeah, Americans were horrified by it. And I think, there's no question that the president has spent enormous time and resources trying to whitewash it, to try to rewrite history. That started also on the Republican side with even the January 6th Commission, which, remember, they didn't participate in, despite, the fact that they were directly involved. They turned it into a political spectacle. But look, I think the bigger issue, let's not forget how many of it was already an outrage that Trump pardoned these people. So, and inside the party, there was horror that he pardoned all of them, right? Even Susie Wiles said this in her interview in Vanity Fair, that no one was prepared for that. Then you have, 24 of those pardoned folks who've gone on to commit horrific additional crimes in the time since. A whole bunch of them have been convicted of molesting children, of abuse, of gun charges, all kinds of horrors. And so you've got this whole group of people that got pardoned in the first place who never should have been. And now, on top of it, we're going to start sending them money. I mean, this is just, it's absolutely beyond the pale.
And all the points we've raised
for
here.
our law and order president.
Yeah, all the points we've raised here. This is only, of course, half of the story.
Right,
the other half is the IRS protections forever shielding Trump, his family, his businesses for any potential scrutiny now or down the road. It's truly an extraordinary...
That, to me, is the ultimate, banana republic side of this, right? Pablo, when you talk about Americans and our view of what this country is supposed to be compared to other places in the world where there's rampant corruption, that blanket immunity, not just of the president, of his children, in perpetuity. So that starts to look like we're setting up Don Jr. to run for president in a few years. It starts to look like all kinds of third world countries, as you say, where the whole internal class, it starts to look like Putin and his cronies who are completely immune from any legal repercussions for their behavior. It sets them up to behave illegally in perpetuity.
And Democrats have been saying to me, even before this news, they felt like corruption could be a winning argument this November.
Yes.
This could help. This maybe even is a line too far for Republicans. So.